Hey guys, welcome back. Today is Dahlia dividing and storage day, which is super exciting, and I know it can be scary. I remember the first year I was dividing my first clump, it seemed so intimidating, and then I felt like I got pretty good at it that first year, and then the second year I took Florette's class and I really honed in on my skills and just the way I like to do this part, and really just got more efficient at it. So now I feel really confident about dividing Dahlia clumps into tubers. And I am here to show you all of my tips and tricks and secrets on how to do this. I am going to hold your hand throughout this whole process. So I hope it's not going to be scary, especially if you're a beginner. And maybe if you're a seasoned gardener, maybe you'll pick up some new tips and tricks on today's video. So let's go ahead and jump in to show you what you're going to need for dividing your dahlias at home, and then we will jump into storage after we are done dividing some of these really fun and kind of intimidating clumps. For dividing your dahlia clumps, you're going to need some bypass pruners. You might need your loppers to cut down your stalks further if they're too thick, but I think I can get to it with our bypass pruners. You will also need some needle nose snips. Now I have a few different varieties that I like to use between each clump. And inside I have a water and bleach solution. So you want to use a 9:1 ratio with water and bleach just to make sure you're sanitizing between each clump that you're dividing. This is going to help us prevent cross-contamination, which is super important when you're dividing your clumps. I just found that doing it this way helps prevent any transfer of anything that's going on, anything funky that's going on with our clumps. I do try to cull any of our diseased ones way ahead of time, but sometimes, you know, you can get one in there that you didn't catch. So it's good just to practice good sanitation as much as possible. It's never going to be perfect, but we try to do our best to eliminate as much as we can of cross-contaminating something that could potentially be diseased. The one thing you want to keep in mind with whatever you're using to actually start dividing, make sure that you have something that's nice and sharp, because if you don't, you could potentially injure yourself. So that's very important. I used to use alcohol, but alcohol doesn't kill everything. So I've switched over to the bleach and water solution. And then I am also going to be using some gloves, because we're dealing with bleach. Your hands are going to tend to dry out, especially if you're doing a lot of them. So I highly recommend you use some just like regular, these are, I don't know, I think I got these at Costco, disposable gloves. And then I am going to also need a Sharpie, because I like to write the variety of our dahlias directly on the tuber. So I will use a Sharpie to do that. That is all you're going to need for the dividing part, and then we will get into what you'll need as far as storage, and I will show you all of the different mediums that you can use to store your tubers over winter time. Now what I would like to do is set up our camera to face straight down so you can get like a straight down view that I would be getting when I'm dividing my clumps. That way you can see straight on what to do and what you're looking for. So let's go ahead and do that, and then we will start dividing some of these clumps. Now before dividing anything, I went ahead and got everything rinsed off to make sure that we can see exactly where we're going to be dividing our clump. First things first, let me go over the anatomy of a tuber. That way you kind of have an idea of what you're going to need to make sure that you have a viable tuber once you're done dividing. So this is the body of the tuber. This is what gives energy to the growth. This is the neck, which connects the body to the crown of the tuber, whereas where you're going to find the growth points, or what we like to refer to as the eyes, which almost kind of looks like a little swelling, almost like a little pimple really. And it's these little tiny raised points here, and they're usually more visible in the springtime. So if you divide in the springtime, you will generally see them a lot more visible than you do in the fall time. But either way, that's what you're looking for, these little growth points here, because without the eyes, no matter how good of a neck or body that you have, nothing is going to grow. So I could literally cut this in half, but as long as I have a little bit of the body, the neck, and then the eyes, I will have a beautiful plant when I plant them out. Let's start out with an easy clump. This is what I call a starfish shape right here. It's really open and relatively easy to divide. This is what I'm looking at here. And you just see how it's open like that, just almost like a starfish. So what I like to do is go ahead and cut that stalk all the way down, because that is going to make starting to divide it a lot easier. Then we're going to come in with our snips, and we are going to cut out all of these roots, all of these little skinny little tubers that are like smaller than a pencil usually is my cutoff, because even the skinny tubers will produce something as long as they have an eye. But all of these other skinny little things I will go ahead and just cut right off, and that will help us get cleaned up to start dividing. So now that I'm looking at this, I want to look for anything that's damaged or has a broken neck, like this. This one is like borderline, but I'm pretty sure that has a broken neck, so I'm going to cut that one off. When you're looking at your clump, you're going to see that you have a dark tuber. There could be one or two depending on if you planted a clump or just a single tuber. And this is usually the mother tuber that you planted out in the springtime. You could discard it, or you could keep it and grow it out again. However, if you grow it out again, it will produce a plant, but it won't really produce a lot of really great tubers. So you can keep it, or you can go ahead and toss. I usually toss mine, but if I'm short on a variety and I have a good mother, then I will plant it out again just to make sure I have something in the springtime. Now what we want to do is go hunting for our eyes, and you have to flip your clump over and kind of look in all different directions to see where they're hiding. I can already see there's a couple over here connecting this little tuber and this little tuber. So what I'm going to do is come in with my snips and go in and just gently cut that off. So there's one that is a very skinny one, but either way it will grow. And then there's two with a little tiny eye right there. So I'll put those down, and generally I would probably keep those together. Now for the rest of these are pretty fused together. I can come in and take this one out. There's a little eye right there. But what I'm inclined to do in situations like this is leave it as a whole, and then I will plant this out again next spring. I can go ahead and remove the mother so she's not on here. So to do that, I'm just gonna come in. Just like this. And she does look like she has an eye over here, so I could keep her. Oop, this one broke, so we're just gonna cut that off. And then I can go ahead and plant this whole little clump out together next year. And as far as marking my tubers, I will actually go ahead and write directly on them. I used to use a pencil, an indelible pencil, but I actually found that the Sharpies work really well. You just want to make sure that they are dry. Your tubers are dry in order for you to do this. So I will just quickly write the variety on here. And I might just keep the mother just to see how all of the other ones do. In worst case scenario, I will plant her out next year. And now these are going to be what we have. So we started out with one in the springtime, and now we got these. This one didn't produce very well, which was expected because I remember planting this one out really, really late. So I'm not too surprised, and it looked a little bit iffy. But some of the other ones, I have a feeling we're gonna get a lot more tubers out of. All right, we have clean bypass pruners, and I'm going to just cut this stalk off, and I will keep my label right next to me. That way we don't lose it and forget which one we are dividing. And with clean snips, we are going to come in and just start cleaning up our clump again before we start dividing. We're going to cut off all of the roots. Again, these don't serve us any purpose. Anything that's smaller than a pencil and anything that looks broken or damaged. You can see this one has a really long neck and a tiny little body at the end. I'm going to go ahead and cut that off and cut off all of these little skinny guys. Cut off all of these tails. sometimes you're going to see these tubers growing off another tuber. These are just feeder tubers, and I cut those off as well. Those don't serve us any purpose. And now we have a better clump to start dividing. Right up here, I can see some really good eyes. Let me show you with my Sharpie here. Do you see those little points? We have 1, 2, 3, 4 eyes on this skinny little tuber. This is not something I would sell myself. I would keep this for myself and then only sell the good ones. Even with this one over here, I see 2 eyes. You know, when people see this, they're gonna think there's nothing that's gonna happen, but in fact, something will grow out of that. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to divide so these 3 are together. This one I might just cut off, and then we'll see how things are looking. So I'm gonna come in, I'm gonna go straight in. This one came off by itself, so we will keep that. These 2 came off as well, and there's 1 eye, 2 eyes, 3 eyes on these, and I will keep these 2 together like this. I see an eye right over here, so I'm gonna come in and trim this guy straight off like that. Let's see, down here it looks a little bit messy. I can tell I planted this probably as a clump because there's a lot of dark tubers on here, which tells me these could all be the mother tuber. Now if I flip it upside down, I'm gonna come in and I see some eyes hiding right in here attached to this tuber. So I'm going to put this down. I'm gonna go straight in. And this is where you might need to come in with something a little bit smaller, like these snips. These are my favorite, and cut around it to get it out. And here we go. There's an eye right there. There's an eye right there. There's an eye right there. So I will set these aside. This one also has a good eye. There's an eye right there. The neck looks good. The body looks good. These 2 I'm going to try to keep together. There's an eye right there, an eye right there, and an eye right there. Keep those together. And let's see what else we have. Now at this point, what you can do is start cutting some of this excess, these roots off, part of the stalks off, and then keep this together and plant this whole thing out again next year. Again, these look like they were the mother clump that we planted. I'm gonna go ahead and cut this big eye off. I am seeing some eyes right over here. So there's like 1, 2, 3 right over there. So if I plant this out, it could grow out and have the growth coming from here. So I could leave it as is, but the problem is there's a lot of rot in this one. So it might not be worth keeping this whole thing. I think I'm gonna just cut it right here and see how this looks. And we'll cut off all of the rot. No, this is pretty rotten. Yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and get rid of all of this other stuff. I feel good about what we have here. So out of that 1 clump or that 1 tuber that we planted, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8 from that one. How cool is that? All right, let's come in with this one over here, which you can see it's kind of fused together. This is Bloom Quest, let's see, Tory P. This was one of my favorites this year. Very beautiful. I'll put the label right down here so we know who we're working with. And when you see that they're fused together like this, you can kind of wiggle them back and forth and try to break them apart. Sometimes they come apart easily, sometimes they don't. And we'll just slide them apart like this. And now we can start dividing. And this one, broke off, we're coming in here with clean snips. And there's an eye on that one. So now that we got them broken up apart, let's clean them up. This is rotting, so I'm gonna get rid of that. All right, now let's assess where our eyes are. I see 1, 2 over here. So I'm going to gently come in and try to cut this one off. Perfect. Let's see. This one looks like it has an eye over here, and this one has an eye over here. So I'm going to divide that and just cut this off. Cut this one right off like this. Okay, looking good. This one also has a good eye. This tiny little thing. And size doesn't matter. Some of the smallest tubers produce the biggest dahlias. It's really funny. It all depends on the variety. These two have eyes, so I'm gonna leave this whole trio together like this. And then this one does not look like it has an eye, but what I can do is cut the mother clump off like this. Or not clump, but tuber off. Remove anything that's rotted, and then save this and see how it stores and if there's any new growths in the springtime. So we'll leave those there. This was a stalk that was coming up, and there could be an eye over here. It's a little bit hard to tell. So what I'm going to do is cut off anything that's rotted. And that is something that you want to make sure that you're doing, is if there's any rot anywhere, cut that off. Like pretend this was rotted. I can cut that off, and yes, I cut half of that tuber, but this will scar over and it'll be perfectly fine. So I will keep this together like this. All of this is garbage. And then we'll come back. This one has a broken neck, so I will cut that off. This one has a tiny little eye just right in the back. So what I will do is come in and cut it off like that. These two have an eye, so I will keep it together. Here's another feeder tuber. I will cut that off. This has a good eye. There's some rot going on back here, so let's see if we can clean this up a bit. All right, that looks much better. So let's see. From this one, we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Look at that. That's still, that every year it shocks me at how amazing your investment goes with dahlias, because one turns into either 5 to 25 tubers, which is insane. This was Bloomquest Tory P. And this is still wet, so I will go ahead and just keep these together and write on them once they are all dried up. Okay, here is a cutting that I grew out. This is K.A., who is this? Guava. And you can see that with cuttings, they produce a lot of roots like this. So we want to make sure that we come in and get that all cleaned up. I'm so bummed because look, I had a really nice tuber here, but the neck broke. So I'm just going to cut all of this off. This is what we're left with. Now with cuttings, what I like to do is cut off all of those little roots. If I have good tuber production, then what I will do is go ahead and divide them. But in a situation like this, I'm going to plant this back out just as is. I have another one here. This is KA Desert Rose. And this one you can see produced quite a bit more tubers than the other one. However, in cases like this, again, I will just go ahead and grow this back out or wait till the springtime. And if I see a lot of visible eyes, I might divide maybe this one, and then this tuber right here. It's just it's kind of tricky with cutting sometimes, because they often do this and they're almost like fused together, and it can be a little bit tricky. So just for me, what I like to do is, if I can divide them like I'll be able to with this one, great. If not, I will leave this together intact like this and plant this back out in the springtime, or divide in the springtime depending on how the eyes look. All right, here is our last division that we're going to do, and this is Rock Run Ashley. Following the same steps, let's clean it up. All right, this is another star shape, and I love it because these are always so easy to divide. So we will come in strong. Right over here, I see one eye, two eye, maybe a third eye just on this one over here. So I will cut this right off. This little guy also has eyes, and this one is attached. So I'm going to try to leave these two together. This one also has an eye right over here off to the side. This one also has an eye, several eyes. We have 1, 2, 3. Put that down. We also have eyes over here on these two. And I think I will leave these together because I do see an eye over here and over here. And I think there's one down here, which I could technically pull these two off. But I think what I'll do is just keep them together until the springtime. Let's actually do one more. This is Kelgai Ann, one of my favorites this year. And you can see that it still has the label on it. There's Kelgai Ann. So this is the mother tuber that I planted, and it still has the label from the Sharpie. So we will come in and get her cleaned up. Now this is one that I love because look at all of the visible eyes on this one. You can see there's 1, 2, 3, 4 eyes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 eyes. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in there. 1, 2, 3 in here. So this one just produced so well. And let's go ahead and start dividing this one carefully. She is a very prized one and hard to find. But when you do, how great that she produces so many tubers, or at least it did for me. And when you're doing this, make sure you're using a hard surface because you don't want to accidentally hurt yourself when you're cutting these. I know I'm holding this up just because I want to be able to show you guys closely, but typically when I'm dividing, I always have it on a hard surface. That way I don't accidentally cut myself. So really all you're doing is when you're dividing is you're coming in and you're trying to get out the easiest ones that you can. And then if anything looks suspicious or difficult to get to, leave it together and then see how it looks in the springtime. So for the rest of this clump, I'm just going to keep it together. However, you know what? There's an eye right there connected to this one. So I think what I'm going to do is cut this little guy off. And then I'm just trying to keep this one intact as well. There we go. The mother clump or tuber can go. This one looks like it has an eye. Yeah, there's the one with the very good visible eye. So I'll keep this together. And this does not look like it has an eye, but I will still keep it and see if there's any growth points more visible in the springtime. So from that one, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. 11 Kelgai-ans. Hopefully they all make it. But how great is that? Now that we have our dahlias divided, we have to think about how we're going to store them and where we're going to store them. Now, there are a few different mediums in which you can store your tubers in. You can use peat moss, vermiculite, coco noir, or wood shaving. If you use wood shaving, I recommend you use cedar shaving if possible. Here today, I have peat moss and some vermiculite. I personally like to use vermiculite. However, this last winter, I had a little bit of an issue with it. It just didn't feel like it normally felt, and I don't think our tubers did too well, so I switched over to peat moss and it did okay. Again, I do tend to lean more on the vermiculite. The peat moss does well too. You will often see that your tubers will start growing roots in the peat moss towards late winter, which is completely fine. I just like the vermiculite, and I will reuse it year after year as long as there's no mold or mildew during storage time. So this is the one that I like to use preferably. Once you've selected which medium you're going to use to store them in, think about what container you're going to use. You can use plastic bins, you can use plastic bags, and I'll show you that just in a sec. You can also use crates lined with newspaper or burlap. Put your tubers in there with the medium, and that does really well, and that's what I was doing before. However, I have now switched over to the plastic bins. It's a lot easier to check on your tubers during the winter time in the bins. It stores better in my opinion, and it's also tidier, so it's easier for me to just go in there, pick up the bins once they're stacked on each other, pick each one up, and then open them up and see how they're doing. So these are ones I got at Costco. You can find honestly anywhere. You can even go to the Dollar Tree and buy them. And I store a lot of varieties in the same bin, so that's why I like to label all of my tubers individually. If you have several varieties of one, then you can use one bin per variety, which is really great. But I like to do it this way. Today I want to show you how you're going to lay them in the bin using vermiculite. So we have our plastic bin, and now we're going to lay a layer of vermiculite, and this stuff is pretty dusty, so if you're going to be working with a lot of it, I recommend putting on a mask because you don't want to breathe in these fumes. And then what you're going to do is lay them out individually like this, and you want to make sure that they're not touching in case any of them are rotted. They're not spreading anything to one another. Now, it's very important also to wait until they're dry before you store them. So once you're done dividing, make sure you leave these out for maybe 24 hours just to scab over and dry up before you store them. I will just leave them wherever I'm going to be storing them. I'll leave them out like this. And then once they're fully dry, I will start covering them up. So what you'll do is you'll have your first layer, and then you'll come in with a second layer, and you will create a lasagna again. So you do a fine layer in between, make sure that it's thick enough so it's not touching, and then you will come in with your other tubers and lay them out like this. So on and so forth. Once everything is filled up, you want to come in with your lid and just close everything up. Now, historically, what I would like to do is just keep the lid a little bit off like this, or you can just drill holes on top of it. However, I found that as long as you keep your temperatures consistent, you don't need to do that. So what I do is just seal them up, and we'll just seal this one together as well. Pretend this is full of treasures. and then we will just stack them up like this. Now, what also helps me when we're checking our dahlias throughout the winter time, because you do want to come in and check them probably like every 3 weeks to make sure there's nothing funky going on, I will actually also write all of the varieties that are on that bin. You can use a label, or I'll just use blue tape and I'll use a Sharpie to write down the varieties that are on there. If you're going to have one variety per bin, I would still recommend you write the variety out here. That way, when you're getting ready to plan out your fields or your garden with your dahlias in the springtime, you're not thinking about what's in this bin, what's in this mystery box, what's in here. So as long as you have everything labeled from the beginning, it makes that process later in the springtime a lot easier and more efficient for you. So labeling is so important, and I know we tell ourselves like, oh, I'll remember that box number 1 was this, this, and this, but really you will forget. I promise you will forget. No matter how good of a memory you have, you will forget, because I have a very good memory and I will always forget. So that is storing your tubers in a plastic bin. You can take that same method where you're going to use whatever material you decide to use and use a plastic bag. So you can just fill this up with your material. So let's just say it's vermiculite, and put it in here, and then you are going to sandwich your tubers as best as you can so they're not touching each other in these plastic bags. So if you really don't want to spend any money at all and you have Ziploc bags at home, you could totally use this same idea just in a plastic bag. So that is one other way to do it. And finally, another way to store your tubers, which a lot of people have had great success with, is using plastic wrap. Now, here is the thing about using plastic wrap with actually a lot of these methods. You have to think about condensation, and condensation happens both ways, from warm to cold and cold to warm. So if you are going to use the plastic wrap method, I would do it in the same room that you plan on storing your dahlias. That way, there is not going to be a big temperature fluctuation and there's going to be moisture built up inside of that plastic. But let me get you a close-up of how you would do this if you're going to use plastic wrap. And I will say I have done this before, and a couple of them did get, there was a lot of condensation built up in them and they rotted. But again, that could be because the temperature wasn't very consistent. So keep that in mind if you're going to use this method. So what you're going to do is put your tuber down, and then you will wrap it like this. And then you can put in your second tuber. Again, you're creating that little barrier with that layer between the plastic of each one. And then you'll put your next one, wrap, and then you'll do your next one, wrap. And then what you will do is cut that. And you can continue going on. I probably wouldn't do more than 4 or 5 per bundle. And then you just seal that off just like this. And then you can go ahead and write the variety right up there, or you just write it on your tubers like I like to do. And there you have it. Now that we've tucked away our tubers, we have to think about where we're going to store them. You can put them in your shed, in your garage, under your house, in a root cellar, anywhere where you're going to have consistent temperature that stays between 40 and 50 degrees Fahrenheit. That is the key to keeping your dahlias safe through storage. You also want to keep them in an area that has high humidity. If you're checking your dahlias, again, we're going to check every few weeks to make sure they're doing okay, and you start to see a lot of shriveling, that is probably because there's very low humidity wherever you're keeping them. So bump up that humidity if you can. So to wrap up and look back at our key takeaways, make sure you're sanitizing your snips and your pruners between each time that you're dividing a different clump. The storage mediums you can use is peat moss, vermiculite, coco noir, or wood shaving. In terms of containers, you can use plastic bins, you can use plastic bags, or you can use crates lined with newspaper or burlap. If you're using plastic wrap to store them, make sure you're keeping them in a consistent temperature from the time you're wrapping them to where you're storing them. And finally, keep them in an area that stays between 40 and 50 degrees Fahrenheit and very high humidity. Well, that will do it for today's project. I hope you guys liked today's video and that you learned something new. I would love to hear from you guys what your favorite method of storage is. What has worked best for you? Share down below. Share your experience with the rest of us. It's always so fun to hear back from you guys and what you guys do differently or what you do the same and what has worked, what hasn't. I will also make sure to link previous Dahlia dividing videos down below in the description box because we have gone over some crazy clumps together. So if you need more reference, go ahead and watch one of those videos because there's a lot of great content in those as well. And that's it. Thank you guys so much for hanging out with me today in my garden and dividing these dahlias with me. I cannot wait to get to the rest of them. And yeah, thank you guys again for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.